In October 2025, a kilogram of rice in the northern provinces of North Korea cost 21,500 won. In February of that same year, it cost 9,000 won. That is a 139% inflation rate in 8 months. Inside a country that has spent 70 years telling its citizens it is a self-reliant socialist paradise. Inside a country that threatens on a weekly basis to turn Washington into a sea of fire. And here is the question nobody in the mainstream press is asking. How does a regime that cannot feed its own citizens also manage to steal $1.5 billion from a single crypto exchange in a single afternoon? How does a country with a GDP smaller than the city of Fresno, California, field the 4th largest standing army on Earth? And why, if North Korea is genuinely the terrifying nuclear superpower its propaganda machine insists it is, was Kim Jong-un standing in front of his own citizens in 2024 weeping? The answer to all 3 questions is the same. North Korea is not a superpower. It is not even a functioning state in any meaningful economic sense. It is a criminal syndicate wearing the costume of a country. When you strip away the military parades and rip off the gold-trimmed uniforms, the illusion collapses instantly. North Korea is not a nuclear titan. It is a 19th century slum running on a 21st century criminal operating system. And today, we are going to prove it with numbers. And when you perform a cold hard economic autopsy on North Korea in 2026, what you find is not a rogue state preparing for war. What you find is a crime scene. Let's start with the number that should end the conversation before it even begins. North Korea's total gross domestic product is approximately $34 billion. That is not a typo. It is smaller than the GDP of the state of Vermont. It is smaller than the annual revenue of a single mid-sized American company. It is roughly 1/600th the size of the United States economy. And this is the country that claims it will turn Washington into a sea of fire. But the GDP number alone does not tell the full story. What makes North Korea genuinely different from any other struggling economy on Earth is the complete absence of any mechanism to escape its condition. To grow an economy, you need trade, investment, and productivity. North Korea has been cut off from all 3 for over 50 years. It defaulted on its international debt in 1974 and has been a financial pariah ever since. It operates under the most comprehensive sanctions regime in modern history, and its command economy is so rigid, so centrally controlled, so allergic to market signals that it cannot generate meaningful growth even when the sanctions briefly ease. The result is an economy that does not just stagnate, it cannibalizes itself. If you want to see more content where we dig into failing superpowers, hit subscribe. Now, back to North Korea. The tragedy of North Korea is not that it was always poor. The tragedy is that it was rich, and it destroyed itself. If you had taken a satellite photo of the Korean peninsula at night in 1965, the lights would have been reversed. The dark, desperate half of the peninsula was not the north. It was the south. Seoul was suffering through hyperinflation, military coups, and poverty so severe that South Korea ranked below many sub-Saharan African nations in per capita income. North Korea was producing its own tractors, trucks, and machine tools. Its GDP per capita was officially higher than South Korea's. The North was winning. To understand why, you have to go back to the Japanese colonial period. When Imperial Japan occupied Korea, they divided the peninsula with brutal economic logic. The South became the agricultural bowl. The North, mountainous and packed with coal, iron ore, and rushing rivers, became the industrial engine. Japan poured billions into the northern half. They built massive hydroelectric dams on the Yalu River, among the largest in the world at the time. They laid thousands of miles of electrified railways. They built the Hungnam Chemical Complex, a sprawling industrial city dedicated to fertilizers and explosives. When World War II ended in 1945, the North walked away with nearly 80% of all heavy industry and over 90% of the power generation capacity on the entire peninsula. Then, after the Korean War, the Soviet Union doubled down. Moscow provided a seemingly endless pipeline of subsidized crude oil, industrial parts, and technical expertise. Entire cities were rebuilt by Eastern European engineers. Kim Il-sung branded this Soviet charity as decay, the ideology of absolute self-reliance. But North Korea was not self-reliant. It was a geopolitical trust fund baby surviving entirely on the generosity of a communist empire. And it was about to bet everything on staying ahead. As the 1970s approached, South Korea pivoted toward global trade. The groundwork for Hyundai, Samsung, and LG was being laid in Seoul. North Korea, blinded by its own industrial ego, decided to double down on the past. Kim Il-sung realized his Soviet technology was falling behind and needed Western machinery to stay competitive. But he had no hard currency. He did not export anything the West actually wanted to buy. So he went on a massive international shopping spree using nothing but credit. In the early 1970s, North Korea approached banks and governments in France, Sweden, and West Germany. They promised to pay for millions of dollars worth of advanced mining equipment, paper mills, and heavy machinery. The ships arrived in Pyongyang. 1,000 Volvos were unloaded on the docks. The machinery was delivered, and the Swedish government waited for the invoice to be paid. They are still waiting today. North Korea took the cars, took the machines, and simply ghosted every creditor. To this day, if you visit Pyongyang, you can still spot those 50-year-old Swedish Volvos operating as taxis. The Swedish Export Credit Agency sends a bill to Pyongyang every single year. That debt, with interest, is now worth over $300 million. But the tragedy was not just that they did not pay. The tragedy is why they could not pay. When you inject advanced Western technology into a rigid command economy, it acts like a rejected organ transplant. The European machinery arrived, but state planners had no idea how to integrate it. No translated technical manuals, no spare parts supply chains, not even the correct voltage of electricity to run the high-tech factories. Millions of dollars of state-of-the-art European mining equipment was left out in the rain to rust. In 1974, with the global oil crisis sending commodity prices into chaos, the music stopped. North Korea became the first communist nation in history to default on its international debt. The heavy steel doors of the global economy slammed shut on Pyongyang forever. No Western bank would lend them a single dollar. No technology transfer. No replacement parts. While South Korea used debt to build Samsung and Hyundai, paying it back and growing richer, North Korea became a museum trapped in the 1970s. By the 1980s, the ROT was visible everywhere. Instead of reforming, Kim Il-sung poured an estimated $4 billion into building monuments to himself. They started construction on the Ryugyong Hotel, a 105-story pyramid-shaped concrete behemoth designed to prove to the world that North Korea was a modern metropolis. They could not finish it. It became the ultimate symbol of the North Korean economy. A massive, hollow, empty shell dominated the skyline, but produced absolutely zero value. Then, in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. The free money vanished overnight. Without Soviet oil, the power grids began to fail. Without electricity, the coal mines flooded because the water pumps stopped working. Without coal, the remaining power plants shut down entirely. The country went dark. Crop yields plummeted by more than 60% almost overnight as the chemical fertilizer supply disappeared along with the factories that produced it. Between 1994 and 1998, An estimated 600,000 to 3 million North Koreans starved to death. The public distribution system, the mechanism by which the state fed its citizens in exchange for total obedience, simply halted. The government stopped feeding its own people. State media broadcast propaganda telling citizens that eating only one meal a day was actually a healthy lifestyle choice. The social contract was broken. And when a state completely abandons its people, the people stop listening to the state. What happened next is the most fascinating paradox in modern economic history. Out of pure, desperate survival, the citizens did the only rational thing they could do. They became capitalists. People began stripping copper wiring out of abandoned state factories and smuggling it across the frozen river into China to trade for corn. These illegal black markets became known as the Jangmadang. Private enterprise was a crime punishable by execution. But the police were starving too. So citizens began bribing border guards with a cut of the profits. In North Korea, every adult male was legally required to sit in his dark, freezing, electricity-free state factory all day to prove his loyalty. But married women were classified as housewives and were not tied to a state job. So the women went to the Jangmadang. They became the smugglers, the traders, the merchants. Virtually overnight, women became the primary breadwinners in North Korea. A new class of wealthy merchants known as the Donju, masters of money, emerged from the wreckage. The state had lost control of its own economy. Kim Jong-il looked at the ashes of his father's empire. If the bottom of the economy had turned to illegal capitalism to survive, the top would have to do exactly the same thing to fund the military and guarantee his family's survival. He could not play by the rules of global trade. He had to become a global criminal. Welcome to Office 39. This is the most secretive organ of the North Korean state. It is not a government ministry. It is the Kim family's personal illicit investment bank. Its sole directive is to bypass global sanctions and generate foreign cash by any means necessary. Office 39 began mass-producing military-grade crystal methamphetamine. From an economic perspective, meth is the perfect export for a collapsed state. It has an extraordinarily high value-to-weight ratio. North Korean diplomats stationed in embassies across the globe were given quotas. They used diplomatic pouches, which cannot be legally searched under international law, to smuggle drugs across borders, partnering with Chinese triads, the Japanese Yakuza, and the Russian mob to distribute the product. They were not just a rogue nation. They were a state-sponsored cartel. Office 39 also mastered counterfeiting. They printed what the US Secret Service dubbed the supernote. These fake $100 bills were so precise in their paper stock and microprinting that they could pass through optical scanners at the Federal Reserve. For years, North Korea was essentially printing its own slice of American monetary supply. But when Kim Jong-un took the throne in 2011, he recognized something his father had not. The future of sovereign crime was not physical, it was digital. If you send a piece of malicious code through the internet, you can rob a bank in New York from a basement in Pyongyang. And there is absolutely nothing the US Navy can do to stop you. Kim Jong-un poured resources into the Reconnaissance General Bureau and built the Lazarus Group into the most sophisticated state-sponsored hacking operation in history. The state identifies children with high mathematical aptitude, trains them for over a decade in computer science, and deploys them abroad with a laptop and a single instruction: steal. In February 2025, the Lazarus Group executed the largest single cryptocurrency theft in history. They drained approximately 400,000 Ether from the Bybit exchange in Dubai. The value stolen was $1.5 billion in a single afternoon. The FBI formally attributed the theft on February 26, 2025. Investigators estimate that within weeks, Lazarus had already converted at least $300 million of the Bybit loot into assets that are virtually impossible to recover. And Bybit was not an isolated operation. On-chain analysis connects the same Lazarus infrastructure to prior raids on Femex, BingX, and Poloniex, indicating a coordinated multi-platform campaign. They had evolved into a highly specialized parasitic organism feeding off the vulnerabilities of the 21st century digital economy to pay for the 20th century artillery pointed at Seoul. Now let us look at the full picture of what North Korea actually is in 2026. The only reason the North Korean economy showed any growth in 2025 was because of two things. First, North Korea turned its country into a backdoor armory for the Kremlin. South Korea's Defense Intelligence Agency estimates that North Korea has supplied Russia with more than 12 million 152mm artillery shells for use in Ukraine. Researchers at Hankook University estimate the total value of the North Korea-Russia military supply package at between $1.7 and $5.5 billion. By late 2025, Estonian intelligence assessed that North Korean ammunition had grown to represent roughly half of all Russian artillery expenditure on the front lines. The regime that cannot feed its own people is now the logistics backbone of a European land war. Second, they hacked cryptocurrency exchanges. And what about their legal economy? What does this nuclear-armed juggernaut actually produce for the world? Look at the 2025 trade data with China, their only remaining lifeline. Total two-way trade reached approximately $2.73 billion. North Korea imported $2.29 billion worth of goods from China. Soybean oil, fabrics, granulated sugar, basic survival goods. Against that, they exported just $440 million back. And what was North Korea's #1 legal export to China in 2025? Not steel, not heavy machinery, not coal. Wigs, false eyelashes, fake hair. The regime that threatens to turn Washington into a sea of fire survives by having its impoverished citizens manually weave synthetic hair for Chinese consumers. China even exports the raw processed hair and wool to North Korea, valued at roughly $208 million in 2025, for North Koreans to assemble into finished wigs, which China then buys back. North Korea is a subcontractor in its own humiliation. Meanwhile, on the streets of the northern provinces, rice that cost 9,000 won per kilogram. In February 2025 was costing 21,500 won by October. Gasoline prices nearly doubled over the same period. The dollar exchange rate in the informal Jangmadang markets collapsed from 21,500 won per dollar in February to over 42,000 won by December. The currency is in free fall. Independent reporting from inside the country describes households in what sources call survival mode, with bicycles and handcarts replacing motorized transport as fuel becomes unaffordable for ordinary people. This is the reality behind the military parades. While Kim Jong-un made 131 public appearances in 2025, the highest annual count in 9 years, while he attended a Chinese military parade in Beijing and hosted 5 summit-level meetings with foreign leaders, his citizens were rationing rice, and the currency was losing half its value. Notably, for the first time in memory, the regime did not issue a traditional New Year's address for 2026. No joint editorial, no leader's speech, no stated national priorities. The silence was deafening. When a government that has built its entire identity on theatrical confidence stops performing, something has shifted beneath the surface. So North Korea sits at the intersection of every structural failure a state can have simultaneously. A dead economy with no mechanism to revive it. A criminal machine generating billions through drugs, counterfeiting, and digital theft. A famine-level food inflation crisis unfolding in real time. A currency in freefall. A population kept in intentional poverty because prosperity would end the regime. And a nuclear arsenal that the world mistakes for strength. These problems do not exist in isolation. They compound each other. A dead economy means no tax base. No tax base means total dependence on crime. Total dependence on crime means permanent sanctions. Permanent sanctions mean no investment. No investment means no growth. No growth means more poverty. More poverty means tighter information control. Tighter information control means the regime survives another year, and the spiral tightens. But here is the question that actually matters. Why can't Kim Jong-un simply do what China did? Open the borders, introduce market reforms, let foreign investment in, fix the economy. The answer is geography. And it is a geographic curse so specific, so lethal to this regime that it has no parallel anywhere else on Earth. North Korea is the only dictatorship on the planet that shares a land border with a hyper-capitalist democratic version of its own people. South Korea is not an abstraction to North Koreans. It is their cousins, their language, their food, their history. If Kim opens the economy, the information blockade shatters. The moment ordinary North Koreans understand in concrete, undeniable terms that their southern cousins are living in the 21st century while they are starving in the dark, the regime is finished. The comparison is too direct. The gap is too large. The humiliation is too total. Poverty in North Korea is not an accident. It is not an unfortunate side effect of poor policy. It is a strict structural requirement for the regime's survival. The darkness on the satellite map is not the result of failure. It is the product of intention. The nukes are not a sign of strength. They are the barricade. A bankrupt crime boss builds around his compound when he knows he has nothing left of value to offer the world. They are not weapons of conquest. They are the locks on the doors of the largest open-air prison in human history. North Korea will continue to hack. It will continue to sell artillery shells to Russia. It will continue to weave fake hair for Chinese consumers and call it an economy. Not because it is a global superpower, but because it is a cornered parasite that has legally mandated its own decay. The Hermit Kingdom is not preparing for a war it intends to win. It is a regime that has already lost the economic war, the demographic war, and the legitimacy war. The missiles are not a battle plan, they are a stalling tactic. Thanks for watching Fall of Empires. If this changed how you see North Korea, subscribe, and we will see you on the next one.